Welcome back to our Operation Barbarossa Diorama. Last week we painted up the soldiers from the two Dragon 135th boxes, and today we'll take a look at building the rest of the bits to finish the diorama. First thing I built was the anti-tank gun, which is the 2.8 centimeter SPZ B41. And my best attempt at German, it's a Schwer Panzerbuchse 41. There are some pretty tiny parts for this, but it all goes together rather quickly. I did not glue the wheels nor the gun to the carriage so that they could be painted separately and I could get to all the little places where all those little bits are. The FJ8 limber was another bunch of thin, fragile parts. I cut them from the sprue with the gates still attached and then used a new sharp hobby blade to remove the gates. This kept the parts from snapping into many little pieces. The card itself is not complicated, but you need to be mindful of part numbers and which side they go on so that it all fits together properly. There's definitely parts that have a longer side and a shorter side, and they have to go on a left or a right so that it all fits together. I also left the trailer hitch fully intact so that when it came time to attach the cart to the FJ8 limber, I wouldn't have alignment issues. I could just cut it cleanly and super glue it back together. Painting was super simple. I gave everything a black prime and then came back in with a coat of German gray to kind of set the tone. And then over top of that German gray, once it was dry, I came back in and lightened that German gray up with just a little bit of sky gray to kind of give it some faded looks. And the last bit of modeling was the horse itself. The kit comes with two horses, and they do have two different poses, so make sure you match parts from the correct horse that you want to use. I'm not sure why model companies always make the body and necks separate parts for horses, but I can never get them to line up perfectly for me. So after lots of putty and sanding and priming, and then reputtying, resanding, and repriming later, this is the best I could do without completely shaving the horse's shoulders down. I chose to make the horse a chestnut color, a fairly common color for horses. A simple, smooth application of red-brown for his coat. I used my airbrush. And a little bit of black mixed into that same red-brown for the tail, his mane, and his hooves. And those were brush painted. The blanket was painted field gray. And like the soldiers earlier, everything got an oil wash. But this time I used burnt umber, ivory black, and burnt sienna for the horse's coat and his mane to kind of keep that reddish chestnut hue. After all that oil paint was dry and varnished, I did come back in and put some white spots on his forehead and dabbed his mouth with just a little bit of medium flesh tone to kind of lighten up his lips. The limber was added to the horse using cut down pieces of tape to the dimensions indicated here in the instructions. Now the kit did provide some thin plastic sheet, but there were lots of curves involved, and so I opted for the flexible tape. It may not look perfect, but it's not springing back like the plastic sheet was. I decided to add some covered ammo boxes to the cart. It just kind of looked plain, like why would you be dragging this empty cart? I used some cut down bits of balsa wood and then covered it all with some PVA soaked tissue paper and let it dry so it looked like an old canvas tarp just draped over everything. The tarp then, once it was dry, was painted field gray and hit with a dark tone wash to bring out some of the texture. I added extra ammo boxes and a shovel from my bits box. Oh, and speaking of the bits boxes from earlier, I found this large offcut of 1/2 inch thick foam. After gluing the foam to a piece of 1/8 inch thick hardboard, it was time to add the Sculptamold. I did leave the hardboard a little proud of the foam so that I could add a small drainage ditch. Into that ditch, I added various sizes of aquarium rocks and gravel and ballast and just anything that would look like a rock. And this I just kind of pressed into the Sculptamold, and after it was all dried up, I also hit it with a little bit of watered down PVA to lock it in place. And with the Sculptamold, I added a small hill in the back corner. So the drainage ditch and the hill were all designed to take this super flat piece of XPS foam and make it look less like they were walking on a pool table and more like they were down a road. A coat of dark flat brown spray paint was used as a primer and a base color once everything was completely dry. Tan earth for some variation in the dirt color was applied with my airbrush. The rocks in the ditch were picked out individually with various shades of rock colors. Speaking of color, I did come back and use my unsanded tile grout for the dirt road. It's like a coffee color, so it kind of looks like the road has been a little bit drier. I wanted this to be part of the early spring, or I should say late spring or early summer campaign. So I put some green flock down as a grassy undergrowth on the hill, down by the ditch, the edge of the ditch, and down the middle of the road. And I just used straight out of the bottle PVA glue, and then sprinkled the green flock over everything. Gave it a couple hours to dry and set up. Turned it over, tapped it off, swept it up with a brush, and there you go, voila. I let that sit overnight just so the PVA was fully cured, and then I came back in a series of static grass applications. I started with a 4mm and then went up to a 7, and then a few 12mm lengths, all a dark green, mostly on the hill and some along the ditch. The static grass works really well because it helps the grass stand straight up. So these long, tall pieces of grass just look like a meadow or like a side of a road that was not maintained at all. And then after a little bit of cleanup, I added some realistic water for some puddles within the ditch. You will notice that earlier I had put some masking tape on to try and build a dam, and I just poured in some realistic water and it ran everywhere. And then I finally just said this was too soon to put the dam on, and I'm just done with it. It got a little bit of wetness to it, and then, like I said, I just added some puddles. So in between all that time when the PVA was gluing and I was adding static grass and coming back and forth, I did come back to the AT gun, the wagon, the horse, and the soldiers from the earlier video. And what I wanted to do now was add some road dust to all those components. So I made a light brown color for some dark brown and yellow pastel chalks. I just don't have a light brown in the selection of big box store, hobby craft store pastels that I have. I think there's something like 16 or 24 different color shades for artists. They're not super expensive and they last forever. And so after scraping the two colors and mixing together on the paper towel, I just liberally applied the powder to the lower sections of the bits, with the exception being the wheels that got powder everywhere because the wheels go around on the bus, and then came back with a soft fan brush to fade and remove all the excess powder. The soldiers pretty much got the same treatment, only I focused heavily on their boots, especially the toes, because those would get scuffed up and dusty, and on the front of their trousers. I wanted to be like maybe they were walking and there had been some mechanized vehicles at some point just kicked up dust, so that it was mostly on their front of their bodies. And so here we'll just do a couple little quick shots. We got the horse and the limber glued down. Then we added the guy who was pushing the cart. We added the guy in the front. He needs to get some reins added. Now that I have him in place, I can get the distance from the horse's reins to his hand. Again, that'll be painted black tape. And then just add the other guys into a walking march. And voila, we're done. You'll notice here that I added a few yellow flowers. Just they could be flowering weeds or they could be daffodils. I don't know. Just something that makes it look like they're out in the middle of a meadow. Soldiers on the march, but not in war. I hope you enjoyed this little video. I had fun making it. And until next time, happy hobbying.